The girl didn't cry when they pulled her from the wreckage. That was the first thing Sergeant Marcus Hale noticed about her. Not the violet skin, or the double-jointed knees, or the 3 fingers on each hand that moved with the independent precision of small, curious animals. Not the bioluminescent stripe running from her left temple down to her collarbone, currently pulsing a dim, panicked amber. Not the spiral pupils that contracted inward instead of dilating when the flashlight hit them. He noticed that she didn't cry. He'd crawled through burning debris to reach her. The scout shuttle had come down hard in the cornfield west of Ray's station, a spiral descent with no control surface authority, impact at a shallow angle that had skipped it like a flat stone across still water, and left a 300-meter scar of scorched earth, shredded hull plating, and something that used to be a sensor array distributed across the north end of the field in a pattern that suggested significant deceleration forces on the aft section. The fire crews were 2 minutes out. Marcus had been running an equipment check on the perimeter sensors when the streak lit up the horizon, a green-white burn that crossed the sky so fast he'd mistaken it for a meteorite until the angle changed, and the trajectory flattened, and the impact made the ground shudder under his boots. He'd expected a dead crew, or no crew at all. He found her wedged under a collapsed bulkhead section in what had been the shuttle's forward compartment. A child roughly the size of a 10-year-old, dressed in something silver and form-fitted that had performed admirably as a fire-resistant wrap around her torso, while everything around it burned. Her left leg was bent at an angle that made Marcus's experience with field trauma inventory catalog it immediately as a fracture, possibly 2, in the lower load-bearing strut. She was looking up at him with eyes the color of old amber, wide and focused, and terrible in their steadiness. Not crying, assessing. "I'm going to move this panel," Marcus said, because he always talked when he worked and children, human or otherwise, needed to hear a steady voice in the dark. He was talking to her the way he would have talked to anyone trapped in wreckage, announcing his actions, giving her something to listen to that wasn't the settling groan of the hull. "It's going to shift the pressure on your leg. That will hurt." She said something in a language that sounded like gravel singing, resonant and layered, 2 tonal registers working simultaneously, like a chord played on something other than any instrument he'd heard. "Yeah," Marcus said, "I'm going to do it anyway." He did. She made a sound like a small bell struck precisely once, sharp and clear and finished, and then she was quiet again. He got her out in 40 seconds. Got her clear of the hull in 90, moving low and fast, her weight cradled against his chest while she held herself still with a control he had never seen in a child of any species. He laid her flat in the wet grass 20 meters from the fuselage when the aft section finally caught properly, and the secondary fuel cells discharged with a sound like God clearing his throat. A deep concussive thump that rolled across the cornfield and flattened the stalks in a wave and turned the night behind them orange. The girl turned her head and watched the fireball. The amber stripe on her neck shifted slowly to a deep and pulsing blue. Marcus sat back on his heels, breathing hard, and looked at her. The fire crews were close now. He could hear the equipment carriers. There were things he should be doing. Report to file, perimeter to note the incident location, safety assessment of the debris field. There were about 14 things he should be doing in the next 3 minutes. He looked at the girl instead. "You're safe now," he said. She looked at him. The spiral pupils contracted, expanded, contracted again, not fear, he thought, though he couldn't have said how he knew, more like calculation. Assessment. The same steady, terrible focus she'd had when he first found her. She said something else in the gravel song language, shorter this time. And then she reached out with her 3-fingered hand and wrapped it around 2 of his fingers, the ones closest to her, and held on. Not desperately, not clinging, just contact, just presence. That was how it started. Her name was Saya, the closest approximation available to human vocal anatomy, The actual pronunciation involved a resonance frequency that Marcus could feel in his chest cavity, but could not begin to replicate with his tongue and teeth, and a single set of vocal cords. She was 11 years old in Keth Standard Years, which the colony's biometric team, working from the reference databases in their xenobiology consultation package, calculated to be approximately 9 years old in human developmental terms. Her mother had been the shuttle's pilot. The 2 crew members in the aft section had not made it. Saya had been in the forward compartment in a crash seat that had done its job until the moment the forward compartment folded inward, and the seat could no longer do its job, which was when the bulkhead had won. The colony's administrative office contacted the Keth diplomatic relay within 6 hours of the incident. The relay passed the report up through the consular authority channels on the Station 3 light towers out. The consular authority responded 22 hours later with a formal acknowledgement, an expression of condolence in the approved diplomatic register, and a request that the child be held in comfortable circumstances pending arrangements for retrieval. The retrieval team, it turned out, was 6 weeks away. Standard coordination, they were told. No available consular routing before then. They were apologetic. Resources were committed. Dr. Yana Petch, the colony's medical officer, got Saya's leg stabilized over the first 36 hours with the help of the xenobiology consultation package and an uncomfortable amount of improvisation. The fracture was a hairline across the lower weight-bearing strut, a bone that didn't have a precise human anatomical analog, but Yana applied to it the same philosophy she applied to everything in her practice. Immobilize the injury, support the surrounding structure, feed the patient well, keep the patient warm, and let the body remember what it was trying to do. It was not elegant medicine. It worked. Saya, for her part, recovered faster than anyone expected. She was moving through the medical bay on crutches by day 3. By day 7, she'd graduated to an uneven but determined walk that showed, once you watched it long enough, a deliberate adaptation to the gait that minimized load on the healing strut. She wasn't limping so much as rerouting. By day 10, she had mapped the entire colony station on foot, including 3 service corridors that weren't on the administrative layout and that she'd found by following the ventilation sounds. And she had formed clear and firm opinions about which corridors had the best air circulation, and which common areas had the worst acoustics, and which members of the colony staff were interesting, and which were not. She also had strong and firm opinions about Marcus Hale. He tried to hand her off. That was the honest truth of it. He'd done his part, pulled her out, kept her breathing, stayed until medical arrived. His shift supervisor, Lieutenant Commander Dawes, had assigned a welfare liaison named Bryn Carver to Saya's day-to-day care within 12 hours of the crash. Bryn was warm, efficient, patient in the way that people who are genuinely good at their jobs are patient, not performative, just functional, and she'd run the translation collar setup and the medical coordination and the communication with the consular relay without Marcus having to be involved in any of it. She spoke 3 Keth dialect variants from the consultation package. She knew what she was doing. She was, by any objective measure, much better suited to the task than a perimeter security sergeant who spent his off hours rewiring salvage components and read instruction manuals for relaxation, and had the interpersonal range, as one former posting partner had memorably described it, of a well-maintained but socially uninvested concrete block. Saya tolerated Bryn. She appreciated Bryn's efficiency and told her so directly, through the collar, which Bryn found both charming and slightly unnerving in the way that entirely sincere children often were. She followed Marcus, not in a way that created a scene, not clinging or weeping or any of the behaviors that the colony's welfare protocols had guidelines for. She would appear at the door of whatever equipment bay or maintenance corridor he happened to be in and simply stand there, watching, with the amber stripe at a neutral observational frequency, until he either acknowledged her or she decided she'd gathered sufficient data and moved on. She never pushed past a threshold she hadn't been invited through. She never spoke until spoken to in those first days, though she had plenty to say when she was. Sometimes she brought things, small objects she encountered in her mapping of the station that she seemed to have assessed as significant or interesting. A cracked optical connector housing with an unusual failure pattern, a bolt with threading that didn't match any of the station's standard hardware, a remnant of some older construction phase. A seed packet from the hydroponics bay that had been printed on the fabricator with a picture of something orange and leafy, and that she held up toward him and said, through the collar, very precisely, "What grows into this?" He told her about carrots. She thought about that for a while and said, "The shape is inefficient for root penetration." "Probably," Marcus said. "They taste good, though." She thought about that too, and then she filed it and moved on. He was not, he told himself, particularly good with children. He had experience with them in the abstract, crew members who had them, postings that ran near family quarters, but he didn't have the natural warmth that some people had, the instinct to kneel to eye level and speak in gentle tones and make the world feel smaller and safer. He didn't particularly kneel to anyone's eye level. He just talked to people at the register he used for people, which was direct and unhurried, and either they found that reassuring or they didn't, and either way the task in front of him still needed doing. He supposed the task in front of him, now, was being findable. So he stopped being actively difficult to find. "You can come in," he told her on the fourth day of the doorway appearances, without looking up from the relay board he was running diagnostics on. She came in. She stood for a moment assessing the room. He could see her doing it, the systematic sweep, inventory, categorization, and then she went to the parts crate in the corner without being told and sat on it, which confirmed what he'd suspected. She'd already fully assessed this room from the doorway, and the parts crate was where she would have sat if she'd been invited sooner. She watched him work for an hour without speaking. He worked and let her watch. Then she said, in the gravel song language, something precise and somewhat extended. The translation collar processed it, with its characteristic flatness, as, "You are securing the housing with incorrect torque." The thermal expansion differential between the housing material and the connector substrate will cause joint failure within approximately 40 cycles of temperature variance at standard colony environmental ranges. Marcus looked at the housing. He looked at the collar output. He looked at the child on the parts crate. "Show me," he said. She got down from the crate, came to the workbench and showed him. She was right. Within 2 weeks she was helping him with the work. Within 3 she was doing the work while he supervised, which was not a role Marcus was naturally suited to. He was not a supervisor by inclination, but which Saya seemed to find stabilizing. She wanted him present, checking in, glancing over, the occasional technical note offered in passing. Not direction exactly, presence with a purpose. He understood it without being told. When the shock of loss was still the first thing your body remembered in the morning, when you had to reconstruct yourself against the fact of it each day before you could function, you needed someone simply there, not processing it with you, not asking how you were, just occupying the same space in a way that was steady and predictable and required nothing from you but to keep going. He was good at steady. It was, if he was honest, the thing he was best at. He started learning her language. Not because anyone asked him to. Bryn had the collar handling essential communication, and the formal exchanges with the consular relay were in diplomatic standard. He started because the collar was terrible at nuance, and he was finding the nuance increasingly significant. The collar rendered everything at the same emotional temperature. Saya describing a mechanical tolerance specification, and Saya describing that she was frightened sounded identical coming through the collar. The same flat, efficient register. He'd spent enough time in enough difficult postings to know that how someone said something was usually the thing that mattered. And in Saya's case, how she said things was happening in a frequency range the collar wasn't built to convey. The Keth language used resonance frequency as an emotional carrier. The same words at different fundamental tones communicated different emotional contexts, not quite analogous to human tonal languages like Mandarin or Vietnamese, where tone changed the denotative meaning of a syllable, but more like a harmonic overlay that carried the emotional register of what was being said at a different frequency from the informational content. The gravel song quality he'd noticed from the first moment came from the way the Keth produced speech with multiple simultaneous resonators, the equivalent of vocal cords working in harmonic pairs, producing a fundamental tone and a layered overtone simultaneously. He couldn't produce the harmonics. Human vocal anatomy wasn't built for it, but he could learn to hear them. He started with the tonal patterns. He started asking the consular relay's consultation package questions that were increasingly outside the package's intended scope. It had been designed for diplomatic protocol, not linguistics education, and filling in the gaps with what he observed directly. Saya, once she understood what he was doing, helped. She would say something and then repeat it at a different frequency register and make a note in the collar's input to show him the contrast. It was, he gathered, a peculiar thing to ask for help with. He gathered also that she found it interesting that he'd asked at all. By week 4, he could reliably distinguish Saya asking a neutral question from Saya asking a question she already feared the answer to. He learned the fear register first because it mattered most. On the 28th day after the crash, she was sitting across from him at the equipment bay workbench, repairing a circuit relay board with the fine three-fingered dexterity that looked wrong when he first saw it and now looked precisely right. And she said something in the low frequency he'd come to associate with states adjacent to fear. The collar translated it as, "Will my mother's mother come for me?" He heard underneath, "I am afraid she will not," and underneath that, quieter still, "I am afraid that if she does, she will not want me." "I don't know," Marcus said, the honest answer. She was quiet. Her bioluminescent stripe had gone to a dark, still green, watchful held. "She does not like me," Saya said. The collar flattened it completely. The harmonics said, "She never has and possibly never will, and I am aware of this, and it lives in me like a stone." Marcus set down the connector he'd been working with. He gave the question the time it deserved. "Why do you think that?" he asked. What she told him took a long time. The collar struggled with some of it. She had to repeat herself in places while he worked through the resonance patterns, and she waited with the patience of someone who had become accustomed to having to wait for understanding. He asked her to clarify twice, and she clarified without impatience or embarrassment. She treated it like a translation problem, which it was. The shape of what she told him was this. Her mother's mother, Ruth Helder, in the collar's translation of the formal Keth family structure designation, had objected to Saya at a level that went beyond preference or temperament. Keth family structures were layered and old and governed by social codes Marcus didn't have the context to fully understand, but the core of it came through clearly enough. There had been something, a choice Saya's mother had made, or a path she'd taken, or something about who Saya's father was, or some combination of these, that the Rutelder had found unacceptable. And the Rutelder had made this known in the way people made such things known, not with one dramatic confrontation, but with the slow accumulation of distance and coldness and absence that, over time, became indistinguishable from rejection. Saya's mother had taken her daughter and gone as far as assignment and duty could take her, which, for a skilled long-transit pilot, was quite far. The shuttle that had come down in the cornfield west of Ray's station had been on the last leg of a research transit that had covered 4 separate jump points and put her at the furthest operational distance from the Rutelder's home station that the assignment parameters allowed. The Rutelder had never met Saya. Not once, not a communication, not a recorded message. As far as Saya knew, and she was 9 years old and observant in the way that children who have grown up alongside absence are observant, she was a person who existed to her grandmother as a category of error, a consequence of choices that should not have been made, not a child, not family. And now her mother was gone, and the Rutelder was the last family she had, and the consular authority had contacted the Rutelder, and Saya did not know if the Rutelder would come at all, or come wanting her, or come ready to be a person who could look at this child and see something worth keeping. Marcus looked at the relay board on the workbench for a long time after she finished. The station hum was the same as it always was. The bench light was the same pale amber it always was. His hands were in his lap doing nothing. "I'll be here," he said finally, "until whoever comes, comes, and if they're not the right person for you, we'll figure something else out." He didn't have the authority to make that promise. The consular authority had jurisdiction over Saya's welfare and placement. The colony's administrative structure had no provision for a security sergeant to make unilateral decisions about an alien minor's custody. He was aware of this. He made the promise anyway. The stripe on Saya's neck moved, very slowly, from dark still green to the warm deep amber he'd started thinking of as her working color. The frequency she ran at when she was focused on something difficult but believed, cautiously, that it was solvable. The retrieval ship arrived on the 39th day. It came in on a Keth Consular Authority transit registry with a single passenger in addition to crew, a dedicated routing that covered 4 light towers in one direction to collect one child, which Bryn Carver told him was unusual. The Consular Authority didn't typically allocate dedicated transits for recovery operations of this scale. Scheduled routings were the standard. The fact of a dedicated ship said something, though Marcus wasn't sure yet what. He was at the docking bay because Saya had asked him to be. She'd asked the night before formally, through the collar, and also in the Keth register she used when she was asking something that mattered to her in a way she didn't want to make larger than necessary. He'd said yes. He hadn't said anything else about it. She stood beside him when the hatch opened, weight slightly favoring the heeled leg, 3-fingered hands loose at her sides. The bioluminescent stripe was a steady, careful gold, not amber, not green, not the working color. Something more careful than any of those, watchful and armored. The Keth who came through the hatch was old. Marcus didn't have enough Keth biology to quantify age precisely, but age communicated itself across species in ways that didn't require translation. The deliberateness of each step, the slight forward set in the posture that said years lived in the spine, the way the bioluminescent stripe on her neck had faded to a baseline silver that pulsed only faintly, all of it said, time, accumulated. She was tall for a Keth, or she had been. The forward set suggested she'd lost perhaps 5 centimeters of the height she'd been born to. She wore something that was not travel clothes. It was formal, layered, and precise, and clearly not designed for the practical considerations of long-distance transit. It was the kind of thing you wore when you did not know what else to do, when you needed to be something other than yourself for a moment, and the clothing was the available tool. She stopped 4 meters from Saya and stood very still. Saya stood very still. Marcus stood very still and thought very consciously about being furniture. The Rutelder looked at Saya, not scanning, not assessing, looking, with the spiral pupils focused and fully present. And then she said something that ran long, the harmonics layered and complex in a way Marcus could catch pieces of but couldn't yet fully parse. The caller processed it with some effort as, "I have come a great distance. I had not expected to come this way. I prepared what I intended to say during many days of transit, and I find, now that I am here, that the preparation was insufficient." Saya said nothing. The Rutelder's eyes moved. They found Marcus, and he was looked at for a moment with the spiral pupils in full direct focus, assessed, categorized, placed in whatever framework the old Keth used for placing unfamiliar things. Then her gaze returned to Saya. She said something much shorter. The collar translated it as, "You look like her when she was young. Before she was angry with me." The stripe on Saya's neck did something Marcus had never seen it do before. It shifted through 3 colors in rapid sequence, amber to a sharp bright green to a white so intense he nearly looked away, and then settled, gradually, into the deep amber of the working color. The color she ran at when something was hard but she believed it was worth trying. She said, in a voice that was smaller than he'd ever heard from her, "She was not always angry with you." "No," the Root Elder said. The harmonics underneath that single syllable were something Marcus felt more than heard. "She was not always angry with me. That was my doing. I am aware of it." It was not, by any measure, a warm opening. It was also probably, Marcus thought, the most honest thing that could have been said. It did not offer comfort. It did not minimize. It named the thing and owned it and put it between them in the air where they could both see it. Saya took 1 step forward. The Root Elder didn't move toward her, but the silver stripe lit up briefly and distinctly in orange just for a second there and gone. Not a communication, not a display. A thing that happened. Marcus filed it. He didn't have the full vocabulary yet, but he thought, watching it, that orange was a color that took a particular kind of courage to show. Her name was Vethsorel. The collar translated it as a formal designation in the Keth lineage cluster naming structure, which placed her in a senior position within a specific family line, and carried a set of social expectations Marcus gathered were considerable. Saya's word for her, Root Elder, was the correct formal register, respectful and distant as a function of the distance between them. Vethsorel, on the afternoon of the first day, with a precision that suggested she'd thought carefully about both the timing and the wording, told Saya to use a different word. The collar translated it as the concept closest in the Keth system to grandmother. She was not warm. She was not soft in any of the ways the word grandmother sometimes implied. She was the kind of person who communicated in precise and weighted language, who found the collar's emotional flatness visibly frustrating though she didn't say so, who approached every situation with the assessment posture of someone who had learned, probably expensively, not to move before she understood the terrain. But she stayed. The consular transit had a return window in 48 standard hours. She did not take it. She also did not immediately assume Saya's care in any active or visible way. Instead, she moved through the colony station in a manner that Marcus recognized from field operations, specifically from field operations, where you were going into an environment you didn't understand and needed to map it without revealing that you were mapping it. She observed how Saya spent her days. She observed the equipment bay and the hydroponics section and the acoustics corridor Saya had identified as optimal for thinking. She attended meals without directing the conversation. She was present in a careful and deliberate way that said, "I am not taking anything yet. I am learning first." And she observed Marcus. He became increasingly aware of this over the first 2 days. She would find reasons, or there would turn out to be reasons. It was hard to tell if she was manufacturing them, to be in spaces where he was working. She would sit in the common area adjacent to the equipment bay entrance and not look at him and not speak to him, and she would watch how he interacted with Saya. The easy quiet of the equipment bay. The way Saya knew where he needed tools before he asked for them because she'd learned his working patterns. The way he knew, without looking up, when she was about to ask a question that she wasn't sure was safe to ask, because her footsteps changed slightly, a fractional hesitation in the stride, when she was approaching a subject she wasn't certain about. Vethsorel watched all of this and said nothing about it. On the 3rd day, Saya was in a consultation session with Dr. Petch, follow-up assessment on the healed leg, and Vethsorel came into the equipment bay and sat down across the workbench from Marcus, without preamble or announcement. She sat for a moment. Then she said in the gravel song language, "You saved her life." "I was the closest person," Marcus said. "I have been told," Vethsoral said, "that you entered the burning vessel before safety personnel arrived, that the secondary fuel cells discharged while you were within the lethal radius of the debris field." "I was already moving," Marcus said. "It didn't seem practical to stop." A pause that had weight to it. "My daughter would have said that was a human answer," Vethsoral said. Marcus said nothing. "My daughter communicated with me twice in 8 years," she said. "The harmonics underneath it were layered and he couldn't read all of them, but there was a resonance his chest recognized even without a vocabulary for it, something that lived below the formal register, in the place where the body acknowledged what the voice was saying. Once when the girl was born. A formal notification, not an invitation. Once when she took the long transit assignment, the last posting, to tell me the routing details, not to invite me, not to attempt resolution, to ensure that someone knew where she was going in the event something happened." A pause. "Something happened," she said. "Yes," Marcus said. "I have been sitting," she said, "since arriving, with the awareness that I am a person who was given one more opportunity, the notification before the transit, and I did not use it. I did not respond to it. I told myself that any response would be unwelcome, which was a decision I made on her behalf without consulting her, which is a thing I also did when she was young and which was why she was angry with me." She stopped. "I am telling you this because you are the person who was present, and I find that I need to say it to someone who was present." Marcus set down the connector housing. He thought about what to say for a long time. That was something he was comfortable with, taking the time that thinking required, not filling the silence with something inadequate. "She's a remarkable kid," he said finally. "She caught a torque error in my assembly 4 days after she got here. She was right about it and she showed me without being asked. She's patient and she's precise, and she's braver than anyone has a right to be after what happened to her. And she's got what I'd estimate is 4,000 questions stacked up behind those eyes that she's not asking because she doesn't know yet if it's safe to ask them." Vethsara was very still. "She's been waiting," Marcus said, "for someone to be the person who tells her she can ask the questions." The silver stripe on the old Keth's neck lit orange. Brief, private, held down immediately. "I do not know how to be that person," she said. "No," Marcus said, "but you're here." He picked the housing back up. The conversation was over. He could feel it the way you felt the end of a shift, the natural completion of a thing. Vethsoral stayed at the workbench for another hour and 40 minutes, not speaking while he worked. The silence was the same quality as the silence he had with Saya, which was a specific kind, the kind that meant the person inside it felt safe enough to be in it. He noticed this and did not say so. Saya figured it out, as he should have expected she would. She was 9 years old in human developmental terms. She conducted independent threat and personnel assessments of the entire colony station within the first week of arrival, and she'd been quietly cataloging the behavioral data on the people around her since the moment she was conscious enough to do so. She was not going to fail to notice that her grandmother was spending extended time in the equipment bay engaging in long productive silences with the person who had pulled her from the crash. She appeared in the equipment bay doorway on the 4th evening of Vethsoral's visit, her grandmother on one side of the workbench, Marcus on the other, both of them occupied with different tasks, the silence between them settled and comfortable. Saya stood in the doorway for exactly 3 seconds with the expression she got when she was processing something she already understood and was deciding how to articulate it. Then she said, in the gravel song language, at a frequency he'd come to identify with dry and considered humor, "You are talking to each other without words, like humans do." Marcus said, "Humans do that." "You do," Saya said. "I have observed it extensively. It is inefficient and interesting." Veth Soral said something in a tone Marcus couldn't fully parse, formal but not cold, careful but not distant. The collar gave him, "Come and sit," a beat, and then, "I would like to hear about your work here, what you have studied, what you have learned, if you are willing." Saya came and sat. She started talking. It took a while. She had, as Marcus had told Veth Soral, a considerable backlog of things she'd been holding in waiting posture, but she started with information first. What she'd done, what she'd mapped, what she'd repaired, what she'd learned about human communication patterns and food preparation schedules, and the specific acoustic properties of the hydroponics bay that made it the best place in the station for extended independent thought. She talked at a speed and harmonic complexity that pushed the collar hard, and Veth Soral listened without interrupting once, tracking the harmonics with the ease of someone who'd been speaking and hearing this language their whole life and understood everything, including what the collar was missing. Marcus worked on the housing and listened without appearing to listen. The conversation moved in the way that conversations do when people are both being careful and both deciding not to be as careful as they'd intended to be. It went wider. It went deeper. There were pauses, and the pauses were different from the ones at the beginning. After a time that Marcus had stopped measuring, Saya said something that he caught fully, harmonics and all, every layer of it. She said, at the frequency register he'd finally cataloged accurately 3 days ago as the one she used for things she'd been sitting with for a long time. She talked about you. Veth Soral went very still. Not kindly, Saya said. She did not speak of you kindly, but she spoke of you. I think she spoke of you more than she spoke of anyone else who was not present. She paused. I did not understand this when I was very young. I think I understand it better now. The stripe on the old Keth's neck went orange-white, longer than Marcus had seen before. She held it down slowly, carefully, with the precision of someone who had a great deal of practice at holding things down and was finding, perhaps, that the practice didn't work as reliably as it used to. What do you think it means? She asked. Her voice was the same, the resonance beneath it was not. Saya thought about it for a moment in the real way, not the performing thought way. I think it means you were important to her, even when she was angry, perhaps especially then. I think that is how importance works sometimes. It shows up in the things we cannot stop talking about even when they hurt us. Veth Soral said something very quiet that the collar had to work for and rendered, approximately. I hope that is true. Saya looked at her grandmother, looked at Marcus, looked back at her grandmother with the working amber stripe steady and purposeful. Marcus says, she said, with the harmonics of someone making a deliberate choice to share something, that when you do not know how to be a thing, you begin by being present. He says this is always a place to start. He is not always correct about everything. He is correct about that. Veth Soral looked at Marcus over the workbench. Marcus concentrated with some effort on the connector housing. He saved you, Veth Soral said. Yes, Saya said. I am told this is a thing humans do. I am also told he is not special in this way. I find I disagree. 3 days before the next available transit window, Bryn Carver came into the equipment bay with 2 cups of something approximating coffee, and the particular expression she wore when she had information that was technically good, but came with administrative complexity attached. The consular authority confirmed the family custody transfer, she said, sitting across from him. Veth Soral is registered as Saya's legal guardian under the Keth family code. Full authority, standard provisions. That's the straightforward part. What's the other part? Also good, Bryn said, but different. The authority wants to know if you'll provide a bond declaration. She paused. The term doesn't translate cleanly. Something in the register of a formal acknowledgement that you were present during the crisis period, that you fulfilled a caretaking role, and that you're willing to remain unknown to. A recognized person in her network, on record in the family registry. Marcus looked at his coffee. What does that mean in practice? Practically, in human administrative terms, not much. On the Keth social side, it means Saya has formal grounds to contact you as a recognized figure in her family structure. It means if she needs advocacy with human authorities at any point, you're an approved contact. It means Veth Sorrel can reference you in Keth community registration as a named network member. Bryn paused again. It's not a legal obligation on your side. It's more like being officially part of someone's story, having your name in the record of who was there. Marcus looked at his coffee for another moment. Yes, he said. Bryn nodded and didn't make anything of it, which was one of the things he appreciated about Bryn. I'll file the forms. He had 3 more days. He knew that, and he didn't do anything differently with the knowledge. He worked. Saya appeared in the doorway and came in and worked alongside him. Veth Sorrel sat at the workbench in the afternoons in the manner that had become, in a week, its own kind of established pattern. The station ran its shifts. The perimeter sensors required calibrating. On the second-to-last day, Saya came back from a session in the hydroponics bay with Dr. Petch and set a small container on the workbench in front of him. Printed ceramic from the station fabricator, lid that clicked shut with a satisfying precision. I made this, she said, without the collar in the Keth language at the register of a statement of fact. I want you to have it. He opened it. Inside was a small mechanical assembly, intricate and precise, components sourced from the parts bins and assembled with her 3-fingered dexterity into a structure he turned over in his hands without immediately identifying. Small as a fist, dense with internal parts, clearly not functional at this scale, but built with a correctness that was evident even without understanding what it was for. What is it? He asked. She told him. The collar worked at it and gave him. In Keth custom, when someone saves your life, you give them something made by your own hands that represents the thing you most understand. I most understand mechanical systems. This is a model of a self-regulating resonance valve. It cannot function at this scale, but the principle is correct at every point. It is the most beautiful thing I know how to make. Marcus looked at the assembly for a long time. He turned it over. He looked at the internal routing of the components, the way the pressure regulation junctions interfaced with the control surfaces, the structural logic of how it was all held together. It's extraordinary, he said. She sat across from him and her stripe went its deep warm amber and she said, with the dry harmonic, I know. He laughed. He didn't laugh often, and when he did it was usually brief and quiet, and this was both of those things, but it was real, and it surprised both of them slightly. The way a real laugh always does, appearing where you didn't know you were going to let it. Saya's spiral pupils contracted and expanded with the expression he'd catalogued as pleased startlement. And from the doorway came a sound. He registered it a beat late. Veth Sorrel, who had appeared at the bay entrance without announcement, had made a sound that took him a second to identify and then identified clearly. Beneath the gravel song resonance, it was unmistakably the harmonic signature of a laugh. Brief, controlled, returned to formality almost immediately, but real. Saya turned to look at her grandmother. Veth Sorrel composed herself with the practiced dignity of someone who had been composed for 60-odd years and was not prepared to stop now. She said, with measured precision, the valve design is correct. I recognize the approach. I studied the same principles when I was young. It was one of the first things your mother asked me to teach her. Saya's stripe went white. Not the brief flash white of overwhelmed emotion, but a slow, spreading white that took several seconds to peak. She learned that from you, Saya said. Many things came from me first, Veth Sorrel said. Before the anger, many things, the precision, the patience with mechanical systems, the preference for understanding the principle before attempting the application. These came from me. I did not know she carried them with her. I did not know they passed to you. Saya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, with a care that was the most adult thing Marcus had ever heard from her, Will you teach me also the things that came from you? The orange-white on Vethzoral's stripe lasted 4 full seconds, the longest Marcus had seen. She let it run longer than she usually did. Maybe she was getting tired of holding it down, or maybe she decided, somewhere in the past week, that holding it down was less useful than he was supposed to be. Yes, she said, I will teach you. On the last night, Marcus sat in the equipment bay after his shift ended and didn't pick anything up. He just sat in the space, with the bench light on and the parts crate in the corner and the station hum around him, in the room that had been the same room for 2 years before a child showed up in its doorway and made it something different. Saya found him at the 7th hour, which was past her established sleep schedule, and therefore a deliberate and considered statement about priorities. She came in, she sat on the parts crate. She didn't say anything, he didn't say anything. They sat in the amber light and listened to the station breathe. After a while she said, through the collar, in the flat register that meant she was using the tool for precision rather than resonance, I am afraid. That's reasonable, Marcus said. I am going to a place I have never been, with a person I have known for 8 days. I do not know what it will be like. I do not know how long it will take to understand it. I do not know what I will do if it is not the kind of place where I can think. A pause. I will not be here. I will not see you. No, he said, not for a while. She is not the person I was afraid she would be, Saya said. I was afraid she would be cold in the way that closes. She is cold in the way that is afraid. I understand that better. I do not know yet if I can do anything about it or if she can, but I understand it. She's trying, Marcus said. I've seen people who weren't trying. I've seen people who would look at the situation you're both in and decide it wasn't worth the effort. She came 4 light hours on a dedicated transit, and she sat at my workbench and told me things she didn't have to tell me because she needed to say them to someone who had been present. That's someone trying. Saya processed this. He could see her doing it, the working amber stripe, the slight stillness around the eyes. You spoke with her, she said. Yes. She told me. She said you told her something about being present. More or less. Did you tell it to me first and then tell it to her? Marcus thought about that honestly. I told it to you because it was true. I told it to her because it applied. Things don't stop being true when they're said to more than one person. She was quiet for a long time. The stripe was the amber of hard but worth trying. What will you do, she said, when we are gone? Work, he said. Calibrate the perimeter sensors. Fix the housings with the correct torque. She made the dry humor resonance sound. The caller didn't catch it, but he did. I left you something, she said. On the workbench, a note. In Keth with a transliteration. What does it say? It says, she said carefully, the same thing that the bond declaration says, that you are known to me, that you are a named person in my story. A pause. I wanted it to be in my words before the form said it in the official ones. Marcus looked at the workbench. He couldn't see a note in the current light, but he knew it was there. Thank you, he said. She got up from the parts crate. She came to where he was sitting and stood in front of him, small and precise, and 9 years old and already, somehow, a person he would know the shape of for a long time. She reached out with her 3-fingered hand in the same way she had in the cornfield, in the burning grass and the firelight, and he took 2 of her fingers the same way he had then. She held on for a moment, then she let go. Good night, Marcus, she said, in the gravel song language without the collar, his name in the Keth resonance she'd been practicing for 3 days to get right. The consonants softened, the vowels differently placed, but unmistakably him. Good night, Saya, he said. She left. He sat for a while longer in the light. Then he leaned over and found the note and read the transliteration 3 times until he had it. They left at the station's early shift change on the 41st day. No ceremony. Veth Sorrel had arranged the logistics with the same precision she applied to everything. The kind of precision that Saya had, and that Marcus now understood, was a thing passed down through lines of teaching that crossed a rupture of 8 years without stopping. Saya came to find him at the East Perimeter check. Travel clothes, Keth-made, silver gray, form-fitted the same way the emergency wrap had been. Her legs straight and sound. A small pack over one shoulder. She stood and watched him work for a moment. Then she said, "She asked me last night what I wanted for the future, where we will live, what I will study, what kind of environment I prefer." Marcus adjusted a sensor calibration. "What did you say?" "I said I prefer environments with good air circulation and access to mechanical systems, and at least one person nearby who does not need me to explain why resonance valve design is beautiful." A pause. She laughed. "The real way. I had only heard the controlled way before. The real way sounds completely different." "What did she say after?" "She said she would do her best." Another pause. "She also said you had told her you could hear the difference between the valve description and the controlled version. She found this notable." "I told her I could follow more than I let on." "She said the same thing about herself," Saya said, "regarding you." He finished the calibration and stood up and looked at her. She looked back at him with the amber stripe steady, and the spiral pupils present and focused and completely, entirely herself. "Thank you," she said, in the gravel song No Collar, at the deep resonance of something completely meant. He understood enough of it now that the collar's flat rendering felt like a sketch of the original. "You're welcome," he said. In English, and then, badly and carefully, in his approximation of the Keth, the gravel song attempt that produced every wrong harmonic but the correct intent, and which made the stripe on her neck flash bright with the frequency he'd catalogued as delight. Veth Sorrel appeared at the Bay Junction. She observed them. She said something brief and dry that the collar gave him as, "When you are finished with your farewells. The departure window is in 12 minutes. "We were finishing," Saya said. "I can see that," Veth Sorrel said. She looked at Marcus. The spiral eyes, Saya's eyes, in 60 years of a different life, were direct and unhurried. "The bond declaration confirmation will transit through the consular relay when we arrive at the settlement," she said. "Standard processing. You will have it within 2 weeks. "I'll look for it." She nodded. Then she said something in the old harmonic register, the formal tier of the Keth language, the one that carried the structural weight of things that were meant to last, that the collar labored over and translated, imperfectly but sincerely, as, "You are known to us." Which was not, he was fairly certain, exactly what she'd said. But it was what she meant. He watched them walk down the docking corridor. Saya turned once at the junction with the full amber stripe and the spiral eyes. She raised 3 fingers. He raised 2. Then they were gone around the corner, and the docking bay was the docking bay again. Maintenance lights, and the smell of thruster exhaust, and the outer hatch cycling through its departure sequence. He stood there for a moment. Then he went back to the sensor calibration, because the perimeter check still needed finishing, and because that was what steady looked like. You did the next thing, and the thing after that, and the work held you while you figured out the rest. Though he was aware, in a way he would not have been 41 days ago, that the work was not the only thing. The transmission came 6 weeks later through the consular relay. The formal packet first. Bond declaration confirmation. 3 pages of Keth legal framework with translation annotations by someone at the consular authority who had clearly spent considerable time on the nuance. His designation, Nonta recognized caretaking figure / first crisis respondent, named in family registry of Saya, ward of Veth Sorrel, was precise and complete. He read it twice and filed it in the small cabinet where he kept the things that mattered. There was also a personal attachment, not legal, not official, a short audio file uncompressed 17 seconds. He played it. Saya's voice, no collar, The gravel song language at the frequency of someone sitting somewhere comfortable and thinking out loud. He listened to it twice, working out the harmonic structures he knew and mapping the ones he didn't yet. He was getting better slowly, in the way you got better at things when you worked at them consistently and without impatience. The content was simple when he had it. She was describing a resonance valve design she'd been working on. A real one this time, functional scale, components Veth had sourced from a materials supplier near their settlement. She described a pressure regulation problem she'd encountered and asked him, in the harmonic register of genuine intellectual curiosity, what he thought the solution might be. Below the technical description, carried in the harmonics the caller would have missed entirely, was something else. Something shorter and quieter, not an announcement but a fact being stated plainly. I am all right, I am learning. She is learning also. There are difficult days and better ones. I think there will continue to be both for a long time. I think that is how things go. He sat with that for a while after the file ended. Then he pulled up the recording interface and spoke for 17 seconds. His best attempt at the gravel song, rough and imprecise, and definitely pitching the wrong resonance on at least 3 words, but correct in structure and correct in intent. He told her about the torque error he'd found that morning in an assembly that should have been done correctly 6 months ago. He told her the solution was straightforward, once you correctly identified the thermal expansion differential. And at the end, in the harmonic register he'd been practicing since the day she left because he wanted to get it right, the frequency that carried in the Keth system, the meaning closest to. I am glad you are there, I am glad you asked. You are not forgotten. He said he was glad she'd asked. He sent the file. He went back to the workbench, where the resonance valve, impractical in scale, perfect in principle, the most beautiful thing she knew how to make, sat in the place he'd set it on the first day and had not moved. The perimeter sensors needed calibrating. The equipment bay needed organizing. The day needed doing. He picked up the housing and got to work. 3 months after that, Veth sent a document. No audio. 3 paragraphs in formal Keth prose structure, translation note at the bottom, rendered by VS no collar used. She had translated it herself. The document described the past 3 months with the precision of someone who chose every word deliberately and was not in the habit of saying things she didn't mean. Saya's settlement registration. Her enrollment in a technical education cohort placed 2 full years above her age group, which the cohort director had initially resisted, and which Veth had, Marcus inferred from the careful wording, addressed with the full force of whatever social standing 6 decades of living carefully had given her. The resonance valve, functional within 3% of design specification, now integrated into the ventilation system of their residence as a working component. 1 paragraph on their daily patterns, morning work, afternoon study, evening meal, the adjustment of proximity that was uneven and effortful and better than it had been. She did not describe it as going well. She described it as going forward, which he thought might be more accurate and was certainly more honest. The last paragraph was short. She wrote, I was not a good mother. I do not know yet if I will be a good grandmother, but I am present. I had believed this was insufficient. That presence without competence was a failure in a different form. I am revising this belief. And at the bottom, below the translation note, in the Keth script he'd been practicing reading since the day he found Saya's note on the workbench. A phrase he worked through slowly, resonance pattern by resonance pattern. It said, she told me what you told her. That being present is a place to start, even when you do not know how to do anything else yet. I wanted you to know that I am doing that thing, and that it is, as you said, a start. Marcus read it twice. He folded it carefully and put it in the cabinet with the bond declaration, and the note in Keth's script with the transliteration, and the documents that mattered. He sat at the workbench in the room where a 9-year-old alien girl had stood in the doorway, and decided, for reasons of her own, that this was a good place, and he was a person worth watching. The hum of the station was the same as it always was. The bench light was the same pale amber. The resonance valve was in its place. He'd gone into a burning wreck because he was the closest person, and stopping hadn't seemed practical. He hadn't expected any of the rest of it. But then Marcus thought, picking up the housing, finding where he'd left off, that was usually how it worked. You did the thing in front of you. You were present for it, you were steady. And sometimes, if you were there and you were steady and you didn't stop, that turned out to be exactly enough to start.